Hey, look who it is. It's Elliotte Friedman. Simmer's morning skate from Rogers Arena. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. How you doing, bud?
How are you?
Good to see you.
Boy, we look good. Like right out of a bar fight last night, or what happened?
No, you know what? It's like Alex Petrangelo said in a podcast that Jay Bowmeister told him the game's tonight. You don't have to skate in the morning. So it's that way for broadcasters too.
Yep.
The game's tonight. You don't have to look your best until in the morning.
Hey, we're both members of the Ice Level Fraternity, or I guess we're the emeritus of the Ice Level. Do you miss that ever?
I do. I miss being a ringside. I miss being in the rinks. Like that's the only bad thing about doing the studio is that you're not in the rinks as much. I really do miss it. I love watching. We're watching Vegas skate right now. Vancouver went out earlier. I miss every part of this. I'll be curious to see what happens in the dressing rooms next year if we go back in them. I miss going into rooms and just talking to people. I really do miss it. You?
Oh, absolutely. It's so much fun. And you just, you're on top of everything. You kind of break news. You see crazy stuff, by the way, down low. And obviously, and then you get to take in the atmosphere. I remember you and I had a couple like Montreal, Boston playoff games over the years, stand there like with our mouths open, watching the crowds, in Boston and in Montreal going absolutely ballistic. You can't recreate that atmosphere in the studio. So speaking of going back in the dressing rooms, let's just assume dangerously that there's no COVID whatsoever. Do we think we'll be able to go back in and do our chit chats with the players?
I sure hope so. I mean, I don't know if the players like it, but I like it. I really enjoy talking to people. I think it, covering this game is, I don't want to say easier. I don't think that's the right word, but I think it's better when you can talk to people face to face and see them.
Absolutely.
I think that's always better. Look, you look at the NFL now, they're going back in towards that. Major League Baseball this year, the clubhouse is open. The NBA and the NHL sure aren't. I could see them wanting to say, look, we'll wait till we start a season.
Yeah.
I know a lot of reporters would love it for the playoffs, but I could see them waiting until they start a season. But I think there's some resistance in it. I always worried that once we got to a point where reporters weren't ever in the dressing room, would they ever get back in? I understood the need for it during COVID, but I always worried there would be some level of we're not going to let media back in there. And I'm sure there are people who think that way. I just think it's worse. And I think it makes the coverage worse. I do.
Absolutely. It's bad for hockey. I think bad for transparency, bad for reporting, bad for just stories and creativity and whatever.
I think also the other thing I worry about for it is it's not, I don't think it'll ever happen in the markets like Toronto and things like that. But I do think there'll be some markets where people say, well, if we can't get in the dressing room, why would we go on the road?
Oh yeah.
And things like, and I just think that's bad for, I think it's bad for fans too. You just don't get the same level of coverage.
Opens a can of worms. Hey, by the way, Mark Stone might be playing tonight. The GMs met in Florida about the whole Kucherov thing and the salary cap and long-term IR. Well, here's a guy, Mark Stone, that might come off tonight, which means probably 3 guys will have to go on LTIR and other maneuvers will have to be made. What's your level of concern or curiosity?
I am not a person that gets worked up about this. I think the only way I would be upset is if I was a player who could play, is healthy enough to play and now can't, right? That I would understand people being upset about. But look, like this horse is so far out of the barn. I think what happened last year was because Kucherov openly mocked it and the t-shirts came 18 million over the cap. I think some people said enough is enough and we can't have this. Look, I think that there are people who legitimately hate it, but this is a league that's allowed it to happen. They could have stopped it a ton of years ago with Philadelphia or Vancouver or Chicago, and they didn't. Now, I do think the league right now investigates a bit more about players who are on long-term injury, like the Shea Webbers, the people who say, we can't play again. And I think in Weber's case, it is legitimate. That I think is watched a lot more than it was before.
Yeah.
But the cap manipulation, I don't know how they're going to stop it.
Rapid fire, the cross-checking standard that was increased at the beginning of the season, where would you put it now?
See how the playoffs go.
We saw a game against the Washington Capitals. This is actually ultimately getting to the question about concussion protocols and quiet rooms. So a hit on a Capital who goes down holding his head and then stays out on the power play and scores. That happened to the Vancouver Canucks. Is that slipped, or was that a one-off, or what's your feeling on the whole concussion?
I mean, concussions are a serious deal. I mean, we saw a situation where a goalie recently got pulled out of a game right at the end of the game, Shesterkin. I don't know. Like, it sounds to me like seeing that, maybe it's different from building to building. We aren't allowed to. We don't speak to the concussion spotters, but I really don't know what to say about it. It's just that, like, you could say, well, okay, well, in that case, this player should have been taken out, and maybe they should have. But like I said, we saw a situation where a goalie was pulled out of a game right at the end of a game because the spotter thought it was the right thing to do. I guess it varies from building to building.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it was this building, and it was Evgeny Kuznetsov, and apparently being one of the better actors in the business, maybe they just felt he'd done such a nice job acting that they'd let him stay out. Who knows?
Diving is a big issue too. There's no question about that.
Tell us about the telethon.
So it's the Canucks for Kids Telethon, and thank you for asking. They do one a year, and they like to do it in correspondence with a game. Obviously last year they couldn't do that because there were no fans in attendance, but this year we're back to doing it. They were good enough to invite me 3 years ago. We had a big night. They raised over $500,000. This is a charity that has raised over $76 million for various people who need it. The community here is extremely generous. I'm honored that the Canucks would invite me to be part of this. I'm looking forward to it tonight. I mean, the thing that really helps, Rob, it's a huge game.
Yep.
And, people are going to be motivated, I think, because it's a huge game. And I'm really happy to be part of it.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're probably still doing it. I'm not there anymore, but you were a weekly guest on the talk show that I did for 4 years there, the national show. And
I'm still doing that one. Yes.
I figured you were still doing it with Gordy. So rare treat to run into you. Very nice to talk to you, and thank you for taking a few minutes out.
Rob, as my wife always says, the less you see me, the more you like me. Good to see you, Rob.
Cheers.